Here's 12 times great F1 driver and team partnerships ended badly. Sebastian Vettel, Red Bull, 2014. Off the back of 4 consecutive championships, Vettel failed to win a single race in his final Red Bull season. There were good technical reasons for that. Engine supplier Renault totally underestimated the hybrid challenge and was giving away at least 0.5 seconds per lap to the benchmark Mercedes power unit. But it was far worse than that. A newcomer to the team arrived and overshadowed Vettel, Daniel Ricciardo taking 3 wins and narrowly outperforming Vettel in qualifying too. As this unfolded, the team became less Seb-centric and, probably sensing which way the wind was blowing, he got out of there to land the Ferrari seat Fernando Alonso vacated to rejoin McLaren. David Coulthard, McLaren, 2004. It's easy to overlook David Coulthard, given it was his McLaren teammate Mika Hakkinen who did all the drivers' title winning in the late 1990s. But McLaren's longest serving F1 driver played a big role in it winning the Constructors' Championship in 1998, beginning a 25-season drought that lasted until McLaren finally repeated that feat in 2024. Coulthard even became McLaren's leading drivers' title contender in early 2001, before Michael Schumacher and Ferrari got their act together. From 2002, Coulthard played the role of experienced teammate to a young Kimi Raikkonen, an intra-team battle that increasingly swung away from Coulthard, and it was Raikkonen who led McLaren to a driver's title near miss in 2003. When McLaren got its 2004 car wrong, it was Coulthard who struggled more, going without a podium for a whole season for the first time in his F1 career, finishing a lapped 11th in the Brazil season finale, while Raikkonen finished 1 second off the win, suggested the end of this great F1 partnership was probably well overdue. Heinz-Harald Frentzen, Jordan, 2001. How do you go from leading one of F1's greatest underdog title bids to being sacked mid-season less than 18 months later? That's the incredible story arc of Heinz-Harald Frentzen's Jordan tenure, which started with an unlikely championship bid in 1999. Third in the points that season for both team and driver proved to be Jordan's peak in F1, with a terminal decline setting in thereafter. But just as Jordan's competitiveness began to decline, not helped by some woeful reliability in 2000 and 2001, so too did Frentzen's relationship with the team. The first problem came in mid-2000, when Frentzen agreed on a new 2-year deal with Eddie Jordan on the basis that race engineer Sam Michael would stay at the team. By January 2001, Michael had left for BMW Williams, and Frentzen told F1's Beyond the Grid podcast in 2023 that his relationship with Eddie Jordan was never the same. Frentzen struggled to match teammate Jarno Trulli in 2001 and suffered a 7-race pointless streak, including 2 big shunts in quick succession in Monaco and Canada. Then, on the eve of his home German Grand Prix, came the shock news that Jordan had sacked Frentzen with immediate effect, something Frentzen only found out when he received a fax announcing the decision. Jordan wanting to keep his Honda engine deal meant Eddie was always going to replace Frentzen with Takuma Sato for 2002, but this mid-season parting was a particularly brutal way to end a partnership that started so brightly. Nelson Piquet, Brabham, 1985. Nelson Piquet and Brabham were a mighty force together in the first half of the 1980s, winning one of the last titles of the Cosworth DFV era in 1981, then the first turbocharged driver's title with BMW power in 1983. But Brabham's subsequent decline temporarily took Piquet down too, before he jumped ship for a title-winning stint with Williams Honda. Despite McLaren's rise, the Piquet-Brabham BMW combination was still generally the benchmark for raw pace in 1984, just horribly unreliable. 9 pole positions, yet Piquet only finished 6 of that year's 16 races. A switch to Pirelli tyres for 1985, back when F1 teams could choose their tyre supplier, made matters much worse. The peaky rubber often unable to handle the BMW engine's full power and rarely a match for rivals on Michelin's. The French Grand Prix at a boiling Paul Ricard was a glorious exception and Piquet dominated, but that was one of only 2 podiums all year. Piquet's departure from the team behind his F1 rise became inevitable, and Brabham's era as an F1 giant was over too. Felipe Massa, Ferrari, 2013. Felipe Massa's Ferrari decline was long, slow and sad. It's easy to assume his life-threatening qualifying accident at the Hungaroring in 2009 was to blame, but the reality has more to do with Ferrari than Massa's brain injury. Massa worked well with Kimi Raikkonen during Ferrari's last title-winning seasons of 2007 and 2008, but when Massa returned to F1 in 2010 after recovering from those head injuries, Raikkonen had made way for Fernando Alonso. After just their second race together in Australia, where Massa held off Alonso to finish third, Alonso's management ordered Ferrari to ensure there would be no repeat. And Massa then had to cede victory to Alonso a few races later in Germany, what would have been an emotional and crucial result to Felipe after all he had been through, almost dying for the Ferrari cause. But those decisions told Massa Ferrari had spurned him and his confidence never recovered. He always resented Alonso as a teammate. To Massa, Alonso was a political operator in a way Raikkonen had never been. Yes, he struggled to adapt his driving to the delicate Pirelli tyres, that certainly didn't help, but the environment at Ferrari also became somewhere Massa could no longer be the best version of himself, and he departed Ferrari for Williams at the end of 2013, having not won a race since his driver's title near miss in Brazil in 2008. Graham Hill, Lotus, 1970. Though the first of Graham Hill's two F1 World Championships came with BRM, it was with the Lotus team that he really made his name, becoming a true celebrity even outside of motorsport in the 1960s. But a crash at the United States Grand Prix during his title defence in 1969 broke both Hill's legs, and his driving career never really recovered. Legendary Lotus boss Colin Chapman placed Hill at Rob Walker's privateer team for 1970 with Lotus support, but Hill wasn't fit and left for Brabham at the end of the year. His final Monaco Grand Prix win with Lotus in 1969 turned out to be his last F1 podium too. Fernando Alonso, Renault 2006, 2009 and 2022. Given Alonso eventually reappeared at Team Enstone for his 2021 F1 comeback, you could argue that 2009 wasn't really the end of his time at Renault. But as the team was known as Alpine by the time he made it back there, and the 2008-2009 tenure was effectively chapter 2 of the relationship that made Alonso an F1 winner and double champion, then it counts as a sour end to a great partnership. Renault was a welcoming environment for Alonso in 2008 after his fractious single season at McLaren, first time around, and though the team was no longer the title challenger it had been when he left at the end of 2006, on bad terms after he criticised the team's rate of development in its close title fight with Ferrari, it was still good enough for Alonso to win twice in 2008. The return to Renault was only really ever an exercise in treading water for Alonso until Ferrari made room for him. Though there were moments of brilliance, even in the much less competitive 2009 Renault, there were also some uncharacteristically scruffy or phoned-in performances from a driver who clearly felt there was a little to push for and whose mind was on his next destination. And given all their history together across 3 stints, you could argue the ill-tempered final races of Alonso's Alpine period in 2022, where he was publicly saying he couldn't wait to join up with Aston Martin, were an even worse final chapter to it all than his limp 2009. Ralf Schumacher, Williams, 2004. Ralf Schumacher and Williams is rarely remembered as a great partnership, but it was incredibly significant for both parties and deserved to end on a better note than it did. Schumacher took BMW's first podium of its 21st century comeback in its first race in 2000 and claimed its first win in 2001. He and Juan Pablo Montoya, who might also have made this list but for winning his final race with the team in Brazil, were there for all of BMW's winning years with Williams. By the time they left at the end of 2004, the partnership between team and engine supplier was on its last legs. Sadly, Williams followed up an impressive 2003 with a miserable 2004, remembered mostly for the failed walrus nose on the FW26. To make matters worse, Ralph missed 6 races after suffering a concussion from a crash at Indianapolis. Once he returned, he didn't quite get a late season win like Montoya did with the conventional nose car Williams finished the year with, but there was at least an impressive second place to his brother Michael's Ferrari in the penultimate race of the year in Japan. Otherwise, this was an ending to forget for Ralph. Niki Lauda, McLaren, 1985. Beating teammate Alain Prost to the 1984 title by half a point completed a fairy tale comeback for Lauda, who spearheaded McLaren's revival in the early 1980s. But there's an often forgotten 1985 epilogue in which Lauda won just one race and suffered a miserable season of poor reliability. He notched up 11 retirements in the 14 races he competed in, missing 2 rounds due to a wrist injury sustained in a frightening crash in practice at Spa. That led to Lauda ending up a rather misleading 10th in the Drivers' Championship, while Prost stormed to the first of his 4 world titles. While clearly adrift of his peak and some way off Prost, particularly over one lap, there were still plenty of flashes of brilliance from the old warrior Lauda. The end results were just fairly miserable, barring his Zandvoort victory, with Lauda's last race with McLaren and in F1 in Adelaide, summing his season up. He qualified down in 16th, over 2 seconds slower than Prost, but charged into the lead with 25 laps to go after a pass on Ayrton Senna, only for a brake problem to send Lauda into the wall and bring a premature curtain down on a mostly wretched final season. Sebastian Vettel, Ferrari, 2020. Vettel's underlying problem at Ferrari was that the boss who had believed in him and recruited him, Luca de Montezemolo, was gone by the time Vettel arrived there, replaced by an autocratic automotive boss, Sergio Marchionne, and an aggressive but not deep-thinking lieutenant, Maurizio Arrivabene. Not Vettel people at all. So he never got to be empowered there the way his mentor and hero Michael Schumacher had been by Ross Brawn and Jean Todt in the late 90s and early 2000s. Nonetheless, Vettel arrived at Maranello to find a pretty good car, and he was quicker than mid-2010s vintage Kimi Raikkonen. When the Ferraris became seriously competitive in 2017 and 2018, Vettel even put credible title challenges together. But there was a belief within the team that he wasn't as quick as Lewis Hamilton at Mercedes, and there was a desire to benchmark Vettel, so Raikkonen was replaced in 2019 by Charles Leclerc, who simply came in and took the team off Vettel, exemplified by Leclerc's victorious insurrection at Monza, where he refused to give Vettel a tow in Q3 against the team's instructions, took pole for himself, and was anyway forgiven by new team boss Mattia Binotto, who had already decided he wasn't going to negotiate a new deal with Vettel beyond his contract ending in 2020. Now isolated inside the team, by Vettel's final season at Ferrari, he was a pale shadow of the four-time champion who'd arrived there from Red Bull 5 years earlier. Pierluigi Martini, Minardi, 1995. You might be wondering why a partnership that only scored 16 points over nearly 8 seasons counts as in any way great, but you don't get many more iconic backmarker combinations in F1 than Pierluigi Martini in a Minardi. That's not just because of that longevity. 3 stints together over 1985 to 95, punctuated by a return to Formula 3000 and a single year at Scuderia Italia. It's the moments of glory across the end of 1989 and start of 1990 when Martini actually led for a lap in Portugal and qualified 5th, 4th, 3rd, then 2nd across the last 3 races of 1989 and the 1990 opener. That spell was one of the greatest F1 underdog driver team surges ever, and there were many more less famous moments of Martini getting a Minardi higher up the order than you'd expect. But a relationship that seemed like it might go on forever fizzled out in underwhelming fashion when Minardi's financial situation led to Martini being swapped out for Pedro Lamy halfway through a difficult 1995 season. And there wouldn't be a 4th Martini-Minardi stint, or any more F1 starts for the only man ever to lead a Grand Prix in a Minardi. Lewis Hamilton, Mercedes, 2024. There's probably no greater partnership in F1 history than Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes, if you count, as he does, his spell driving for the works Mercedes engine McLaren team. All of Hamilton's F1 success from 2007 to 2024 was powered by Mercedes. That original McLaren partnership ended on something of a sour note in itself in 2012, as McLaren struggled to maintain the heights that launched Hamilton as a superstar rookie and then F1 world champion through 2007 and 2008. Hamilton's subsequent achievements at the Mercedes Works team speak for themselves, as he obliterated records once thought untouchable. But that controversial defeat to Max Verstappen at Abu Dhabi in 2021 was a pivotal moment after which Hamilton's time with Mercedes took a noticeably downward turn. He managed to end the longest winless run in his entire F1 career, 56 races, with a vintage performance in the 2024 British Grand Prix in front of his adoring home supporters, but otherwise this season has been arguably Hamilton's worst in F1. He admits he struggled to control his emotions during a difficult farewell with a team that's also given him his best years in F1, and it's also the first time he's been comprehensively beaten by a teammate in qualifying over a full season. There would appear to be something endemic in the way these ultra-stiff, ultra-low ground effect F1 cars don't give Hamilton the feedback he wants on corner entry to do his best work. And until his Ferrari chapter begins, it remains to be seen whether this was simply a sad end to a great F1 partnership, or is in fact the ongoing sad end to a great F1 career.